Something clarifying when you're in a room with more than 50 plus $1 million practice owners, seven figures and multi seven figure businesses. They're all experts in different categories and they're doing a lot of things so phenomenally. We just wrapped up Group Practice Con last week here in Chicago. We had close to 60 practice owners come show up in person for a 2-day growth event about adding their next $1 million plus in revenue to transform their practice. And they were all at or above about $1 million already in revenue. It raised a great question. Why are those people wanting to grow? And if you're already that size or smaller, why should you want to grow and scale in the private practice space? What's on the other side of that? What are you saying yes to? Why are we doing this crazy thing of business entrepreneurship with a group practice? So let's dive in and unpack that today for your benefit.
Yeah. Why grow? Sometimes it's like the biggest headache in the world when you're trying to like push into something and it's like, now it's time to grow. Now it's time to grow. And you're just like banging your head against the wall and it's not growing, or maybe it's not working well, or maybe it is working well. And it just opens up a whole new can of worms for growth. And so I think oftentimes when we're thinking about growth, especially in this context, lots of private practice owners want stability. Lots of private practice owners want more infrastructure in the form of like team members. So maybe they don't have to do as much work. Sometimes they just actually want the money to be able to do cooler, funner, different things. So like private practice is just a great springboard into serving your marketplace or your community. I was speaking to someone yesterday with lots of clinicians and they were talking about building an app to maybe serve their people more at a deeper capacity. And it's like all things are possible with money, with time, with energy. And so why not grow? Maybe is another question. I think when you look at it from the other side of the coin is like the reason why you don't want to grow is probably because you're feeling overwhelmed. The reason why you don't want to grow is probably because it's unmanageable. There's too much pain maybe in growth, or maybe you don't have a clear path to growth. And
Yeah.
so
I think
I
that's what
love
sticks
this event.
out to me is, there are practice owners in that room doing $10 million in annual revenue, those that doing $1 million in annual revenue, and everyone in between. They all had problems. I mean that genuinely. Nothing was perfectly going right in their practice. But as they get larger, as they've chosen growth again and again, their problems have changed. To some degree, you do get to choose the reality in your own business and what types of problems you want to solve. And I think that's answering the question of why do you want growth? Is it for freedom? Is it for profit? Is it for stability? Is it for joy? Sometimes growing and building the thing and leading the people, that's just fun. And the better you get at it, the better it feels to play that game, play the business game at a higher level. But I heard most often they're building something to impact their clinicians better, provide better benefits, more structure, more time off, better pay, and they need to be larger to make that happen. And they're doing it for their clients. When they can control the aperture of the quality of their care and make sure that that happens inside of their practice, they control the outcomes of thousands and thousands of clients on an annual basis to an incredible impact. And so often growth on the other side of it gives you some really clear things. I started and I kicked off the event with a concept called design, delegate, lead. I was especially talking about it through the marketing lens, but that framework, design, delegate, lead, we've talked about here before, it applies to the full practice owner growth journey. And we were spending with these practice owners a lot of time in the all three categories, but in the delegation and in the leadership segment of things. But if you skip the design step, especially in the early days, if you're under $1 million in revenue right now, you have to know why you want to build a practice and you have to know what you're designing and how that's important for your growth.
Yeah. We hit on these topics a lot because it is impossible in private practice to hire internal team members for everything. It just doesn't make sense. And so delegation is so important when it comes to your growth because you can't have an on-staff copywriter, or you can't go to Upwork every time you need something done for your website. It just doesn't make sense and it's not scalable. And so you use like vendors, right? But beyond that, if you haven't designed your system to be able to function and operate in a scalable way, it's just gonna muddy up the waters. You're gonna be doing 30 things. I talk to practice owners all the time, but they haven't designed something that they stick to, and they end up doing a million things, and then they try delegating a million things, and then they're like, I don't know where all my profits are going. I don't know where all my money is going. I don't know where all my time is going. I don't know where well, it's going everywhere. And becoming the leader for your private practice is so important. Even these practices with $10 million of revenue, they're just now starting to crest over the point where they are leading the practice, where they are the leaders, where they have operators or other leadership team members in place. And so we get to lead and we have to lead in a helpful capacity there. So create consistency, create that process for yourself and just continue growing.
Yeah. Attilio had a really valuable session on the bottlenecks that can happen inside of the practice. And growth will stall. It's inevitable. I mentioned earlier all the practices in that room had problems, right? They many of them had hit a growth plateau where they were stuck at 2 million in revenue or 5 million in revenue, whatever it was, and they were trying to figure out what was the thing that's holding them back. Attilio, if a practice owner has been stuck at the same revenue or circling the same problems consistently for a while, where do they even start to look to figure out why they're stuck and where they need to head next with growth?
Yeah, it really comes down to two numbers. It's utilization and then lifetime value. So lifetime value is just how much is a client worth for you and your practice. You can calculate that by looking at retention. So how many sessions does a client come to you on average, and how much are they worth for those sessions? So if your average reimbursement's $110 and on average people come to you for 10 sessions, like in a rolling 12-month period, your people are worth $1,100. And you put in utilization in here because that number it gives you can calculate utilization quickly just by looking at your total staff size. So if they're full time or part time, you have a a set amount that you consider full time, right? So it's 20 sessions maybe in a week. Let's say you have 10 clinicians. 10 clinicians times 20 sessions is 100% capacity at 200 sessions for the week. And just look at your previous week's sessions that you build. And so if you build 100 sessions and there's a 200 cap, then you're 50% utilized. And so these two numbers play together by showing you how much space you have, how much clinical capacity you have, and how long people stick with you. And from there, you can determine budgets, you can determine how much it's worth to spend to acquire a new client, you can determine if your practice is profitable or not, like in the long term. You can determine all kinds of cool things from those two numbers. And we are finding that even the largest practices didn't have those numbers on hand or couldn't calculate them quickly. And so even some of these simple metrics that just like really tell the whole story about your business are lacking. Are lacking.
When we think about bottlenecks, that's a very easy way to spot essentially, do we need to market more to fill in our clinical volume that we're missing, or do we need to hire more, right, to expand the top end of our potential clinical sessions? That is the front to back end structure of your business. But you as the leader, you as the business owner sits in the center of all of this. And we often see practice owners become their own bottleneck. This goes to the delegation and leadership thing. You're the highest ROI element in your practice, meaning that you are the biggest hourly earner if you own the business, and you have the potential to affect the business growth the most if you're still in the day-to-day operations. This means that if you are bogged down with activities, with places, with frameworks, with day-to-day operations pieces that are below your pay grade for the size of business that you're currently at, you're not going to experience the growth, because a great business owner is constantly transferring things off their plate and filling it with bigger and better ROI elements. Share the hat analogy with Stephanie, one of our practice consultants, Attilio, about how do we do this better, just practically.
Yeah, so Stephanie ran everyone through a really cool exercise where she had white hats in front of everyone and she gave everyone markers and she wrote down just what are all the hats. She asked everyone to write down what all the hats were that they were wearing. And some people were saying that they were wearing the biller hat and they were wearing the marketer hat and the leader hat and the witch hats. So all our practice owners wrote down all these different hats that they were wearing as it pertained to leading and growing and maintaining their practice, maybe even their personal life. She did something really cool and she asked everyone to circle the one big hat that you really want to wear. And it was pretty interesting because lots of people had 10, 15 things that they wrote down on their hat and then ended up circling this one hat. And so her big question was, which hats are you going to take off? Right? How many or which hats can you actually transfer to someone else? Or how can we put ourselves in a position to create a system where we're not wearing so many hats, where we're not stretching ourselves so thin as a compromise for maybe poor systems or bad team members or maybe hard conversations or otherwise.
100%. I think one of my favorite, as I was hearing rumbling in the rooms, people were taking off the janitor hat for their brick and mortar location, which is great. People were taking off even larger hats, marketing data collection, strategy pieces like website design, like things that they have clearly outgrown by skill or by practice size, but not by function. Here's the thing, your functional reality in your business is the reality. And I think both Attilio and I, we bump up against that ourselves. Is like we know so much. There's so much clarity on kind of what happens next. And but like businesses play by growth rules, and our functional reality of what's on our plate consistently, routinely, habitually is a reflection of the business that we've built. It's the reflection of the business that you've built. And that's why going back to that design, delegate, lead. Equip yourself with what needs to be built and why you're building it. Learn the rules, learn the habit, learn the skill of delegation, and continue to lead yourself and your team effectively to make all of that happen. There are two quotes from Nikki Ramirez, an HR consultant that works with a lot of practices that stuck out to me that I just wanted to share with you all this week. Quote number one is, how you lead your team is your culture. How you lead your team is your culture. And if you can't define it, you can't delegate it. If you can't define it, you can't delegate it. We'll
Guys,
see you
next
guys.
time.